Delay. We are powered by Protea Hotel by Marriott in Entebbe, and today we're going to be discussing a very sensitive topic, which is about enforcement of illegal broadcasters, megaphones, and point-to-point links. Of course, this is very fundamental information to you people who consume media, people who consume information. So you want to sit back and enjoy what is going to unfold here. To discuss this is Mr. Ibrahim Bbosa, who is the head of public and international relations at the Uganda Communications Commission, and it is my pleasure to introduce him to you. Good morning to you, sir.
A very good morning, Luke, and to our viewers. It is always a pleasure to be invited here. I think I've been, this is my third time coming to Family Television, and I think we have some interesting but also sensitive information we would want to share with members of the public regarding the sanity of our communication sector.
Okay. Now, speaking of speaking about illegal broadcasters, what is the criteria of being a broadcaster before we dive into someone being termed as illegal?
Our viewers would want to know that communication, the market for communication services is a regulated market, and the Uganda Communications Commission is the only body in Uganda by law that would authorize and license anybody to participate commercially in the communication sector. We are licensing, for example, telecommunication services, broadcasting services. We are licensing data communication, people who are doing broadcast services but over the internet. We are licensing film producers in terms of content for film, stage plays and things of the kind. And these are things that ideally put together are designed to inform, to educate, but also uplift the moral standards of our country. So we hold it very dear. Many of us are using it for entertainment purposes. So meaning that to participate in that space, you need a license. Why you need a license? Because many players in there are basically in competition with each other. We have over 300 radio stations in Uganda. We have over 40 television stations. We have countless people who are doing blogging and so on. So you'll find that these people have to play by a certain set of rules. The most important rules, at least for purposes of this discussion, are what we call the minimum broadcasting standards. You cannot let anybody do what they want, when they want, and how they want it. Otherwise, that's where we get issues of inappropriate content. We get issues of violation of the spectrum, because people in telecommunication and broadcasting use a frequency. They use spectrum. But remember, this is a finite resource. If somebody has paid the spectrum and you illegally come and connect on the network, you will cause interference, and you're causing interference to somebody who has already paid his due, somebody who is licensed, somebody who is playing by the rules of the game, and you are not known. You are basically, in violation. So ideally, for you to become a player in this, you have to be licensed by the Uganda Communications Commission, and the licenses vary. For example, if we look at broadcasting, you're either national broadcaster, or a regional broadcaster, or a community-based broadcaster. So those are the categories of the licensing. So it is important that people in this space are licensed. Failure to do so, the law also prescribes penalties for somebody who gets into this space without a license. That is why it is very critical. Yet you see, as Uganda Communications Commission, we are more interested in enhancing, creating competition, and trying to provide space for people's creativity and innovation in this space. That is why regulatory sanction comes at the tail end, when everything else has failed. So we find ways of engagement, we find ways of educating each other, we have ways of having conversation. If all that fails, we will put you on notice. And if putting you on notice also fails, then we bring in regulatory sanction. So it is important that you do not go the sanction way, because also the penalties are stiff for somebody failing to abide by the laws of the country.
Now, before we go to the penalties, could you tell us, or could you give us an overview regarding those that are illegal broadcasters? What is the overview? How do we have numbers of illegal broadcasters?
So The recent survey we did, because we do undertake monitoring of the radio spectrum regularly, and our engineering department, the last monitoring they did, they came up with a number of 25 broadcasters who were on the network illegally, not known to us. We had never signed any frequency to them, and yet they were broadcasting, and interestingly, they were commanding a sizable number of following.
25.
You get me?
Wow.
So what we did, because it is part of our procedure and our DNA in approach, we did issue notices of cease and desist notices. This one basically is to tell you that what you're doing is wrong, and you need to put this intervention off the network, and basically maybe even surrender your equipment. Of these, some of them actually heeded to that. A couple still were reluctant to do so. We went on, that was in January, and round about July this year, we also issued court summons to those who were failing to do so. Interestingly, 17 of them failed to abide by the desist notice, even the summons. So we felt that now we have to push a gear further. So for these 7 broadcasters, many of them that are in areas of Masaka, many of them are in Masaka and the Greater Masaka, you will find them in those areas. I forget the other geographical locations, but at least we know now where they are. We have been able to engage with them, and now we are going for enforcement. Enforcement means that 1, we will close you down. 2, we will confiscate any equipment you have, and actually that equipment will not be returned to you even when you regularize. You have gone through the full spectrum of engagement. So right now it is basically enforcement. But what we're even telling them right now, you do not have to wait for enforcement. With this kind of conversation, with what I am saying, you need to know that at least this is serious business. There is a violation happening, especially for those who are already on the network legally, and you need to stop. We do not know what you're doing. We do not know the content that you're sharing with the public, whether it actually meets the test of molarity or the minimum broadcasting standards. So we are going into that space. But remember, it is not only the broadcasters. We also have, in the telecommunication space, we have people who have chosen to install point-to-point links. Many people call them transmitters, and they're offering Wi-Fi services. These are people, many of them are in downtown Kampala here, in Kololo, and also in Nakasero. So they are offering a licensed service, but while they're not licensed. But the fact is, they're operating in what we call the 3,500 megahertz band. That band has been provided for MTN and Airtel services. You operating in a space where you're not allocated, that means you interfere with services of legitimate providers. That means you are lowering the quality of service of legitimate consumers. So this is very illegal. There are stiff penalties for operating telecommunication equipment without a license, with that assignment, and we're saying that these should come down. We are confiscating these. If you need to be able to operate in this space, whether as a broadcaster, whether as a telecommunication provider, all you have to do is to put your request. We identify if there is spectrum and frequency within the area you want to operate. If it is there, we will preserve it for you, and you go through the application process, and then you'll be able to have a legitimate business. Otherwise, do not go and put illegitimate businesses because they contravene the law, but most of all, they are also disturbing. They are a nuisance to legitimate licensed providers and consumers. We also have people who have decided to put up the Bizindalo.
Yes.
Now, Bizindalos are not provided for under the Uganda Communications Commissions Act, and they are illegal per se. Because 1, we don't license Bizindalo, but 2, they are also a nuisance. These are things that distort people's peace and will to enjoy their places of abode or their land or something like that. So we have so far gotten 20 complaints of Bizindalo that are running commercially, and these Bizindalos, we are going hard on them. We are confiscating them. There are penalties for the users. These people have been even put on notice, I would say. But remember, Bizindalo is a bigger problem. So even along the way, any Bizindaro that we are finding in that nature will be also dealt with in that manner.
Okay.
Now, it is important for people to separate between what we call Bizindaro used for broadcasting purposes, because these are Bizindaros that play music, they announce breaking news, they announce people who are dead in a location, they will announce who has lost a goat. So they're basically providing a service that would ordinarily be provided by a radio station. So they are in competition with radio stations.
Okay.
But we also have these Bizindaros that fall in the caliber of noise pollution. You know, the PA systems, these are guys who are traditional healers and they're announcing their medications and that kind of thing. Those ones are basically, they are not broadcasting per se, but they are causing noise pollution. And they are provided for under the NEMA Act, under the KCC Act, and they're usually dealt with by the local authority. We are going strong on people who are using these systems for purposes of broadcasting. In fact, many of them, they actually use this system and connect into an existing radio station. And basically they are relaying, they are relaying talk shows, they are relaying music and this kind of thing. So that is illegal, and this is something that we would want people to desist from.
Wow, that is a strong one. So what is the criteria for one to acquire a license before we go to what happens when they fail to meet the required standards?
First of all, you have to put in an application, and that application, you should be able to state the kind of station you want to put up. Usually stations may be entertainment stations, maybe more news heavy stations. News usually cuts across. Others may be faith-based stations, depending on what you want to put. But you need also to have to show us how is it going to impact the community. What are you bringing to the community in there? We need to understand that you know what you're doing at the end of the day. So we'll be asking you for a business plan for that station. We'll be asking you for a technical plan. What is the equipment? Because the equipment you use has to be type approved. It has to be authorized to work in the country. If you bring in equipment that is likely to create interference, you'll be interfering with the entire network of other broadcasters that are in here. So the equipment has to be type approved. So once you put in that, so the team goes on to identify spectrum and frequency that you will be used for these purposes. Okay. Now, if the spectrum does exist, because it's also possible that you are in an area whereby the spectrum has been overutilized, and we will tell you so. So there are many people who want to open a radio station, and we tell them, but we do not have spectrum in that location. That is possible. So that means you either go to buy out an existing player, or maybe find another location where you will be operating. Once that has been provided, then there will be those legalities that go about the constitution of who the company is, who owns it. We will put out a notice in the public, in the papers, saying the company is also owned by these kind of individuals would want to put up a broadcast station. Remember that the spectrum and the frequency that we use, what we call like the numbering resources we use, these are property of the government of Uganda, and they are property of the people of Uganda. We only manage them in trust. So we have to make sure that they are used well, they are used efficiently, because they are finite resources. So once somebody has no issues, nobody has an issue with the people putting up the station, we will go ahead and issue them a license. So basically you will have you bring in your equipment, you set up, and you begin to roll. Okay. In your license, there will be some do's and don'ts. Usually, they will tell you the things that you have to do, the kind of reports that you have to submit, the kind of service we expect you to provide, and also the standards you need to be able to abide by. Okay. Especially in broadcasting, there would be the minimum broadcasting standards. If it's telecommunications, there is a quality of service expectation, and also coverage that you need to be able to do. Okay. So basically, that's what you'll be able to go through. It is usually a bit of a rigorous process. Usually the law says that one should be able to get a response of whether they will be able to get a license or not from the commission within 60 days. But that is dependent on if you have submitted all the requirements. So sometimes people make a submission and we're requesting for more information. The longer you take to submit more information is the longer it will take you to get a license.
Okay.
So usually people get a license within a year's period, on average from what I have seen, but you can get it for less time if everything is right. The spectrum is available, the frequency is available, and all your documentation is in place.
Okay. And what do you think for the time maybe you've been here? What do you think challenges people not to go for licenses? Because we have had so many of them, just like you listed, people are operating. What do you think disturbs or contravenes them from getting these licenses?
A broadcast station, for example, is not a cheap undertaking. It is costly business. And you also have to know the business, just like any business. There are many people who have invested, for example, in broadcasting and have actually failed to make the money. Because remember, in broadcasting, probably most of the money comes in the way of advertising. Okay? So, and there's a lot of competition in that area. So you must be able to demonstrate quality, reach, and engagement of your audience for advertisers to be able to believe in you. So many people, first of all, shy away with the cost, just the setup cost of having a studio and equipment, and then a license. And remember, licenses are renewed on an annual basis. Okay, you have to get compliance certificates. Many people do not want to go through that rigor and supervision, so they would rather take a shortcut. Okay. Equally, when it comes to telecommunications, same story. It is very heavy investment. You need to understand the market. In fact, for telecommunication, you need to know how you can differentiate yourselves from the existing players, because we have some existing players that have been here for quite a while and have made a name for themselves, have created some mileage in terms of client reach and market share. So you need to know what are you offering differently. So if you don't understand the business, you could actually put money where you would lose it. So these are not areas for interventions for somebody with a weak heart, if I may put it.
Yes.
You need to know your game. You need to hire the experts who can guide you in this field to do so. So that anywhere where there is stringent monitoring, stringent regulation, usually it is also ripe for people to circumvent that. It's just like smuggling. Simply because somebody knows that they have to go through customs, they need to pay taxes, there will always be people who want to still go through without meeting the obligations, and that causes that.
Wow, that's interesting. So, and are there also costs? Maybe is it the costs that also hinder them?
The costs are statutory, really, and there's nothing we can do about the cost. These costs are not set by us. We cannot increase or reduce them. They're usually set by law. The acts in this country are policy, and they are set by the Parliament of Uganda. So if there are issues of costs, usually those are things that can be discussed at a policy level. Whether they are increased or decreased, that is something that can be discussed. But I think anywhere, regardless the costs, there are people who would not want to pay anything for a service. True. Isn't it? So, but if we have seen many of the successful ventures, you have Family TV and so on, if people are able to meet those costs and still be able to deliver service, that means there is something to be gained from it. And people should be able to do the right thing. Wow.
Now let's look at the penalties. First and foremost, for the broadcasters. If you are an illegal broadcaster, you did mention of the radio stations and whatsoever. What are the penalties these people can face?
Okay. Now, for starters, if you are, let me begin with the people who are violating the telecommunication infrastructure using links under Section 22 of the Uganda Communications Act. If you are found with these installations that are illegal, providing Wi-Fi services, you will be paying a fine of 1,920,000 shillings, or be taken to prison for a period of up to 4 years.
Wow.
So that is when convicted. So definitely you will get arrested. We will prosecute you in courts of law, and if the courts of law find you guilty, that is the penalty you will fine. Then if you find, for example, people who are doing illegal broadcasting, especially people with the Zindalo, first of all, if you are found liable for running an illegal broadcast equipment, the law says that you will have a penalty of 30 million shillings or imprisonment of up to 5 years. That is a steep penalty
5 years
for that kind of violation. If you look at, now there is wayfinding you, broadcasting with equipment that is not allowed. But you may be a broadcaster whose license expired, for example, and you're still operating without a license. So you were initially licensed, probably after a year, your license expired, but it was never renewed. So if you're found operating without a license, the penalty is 500,000 or imprisonment of up to 1 year. Okay?
When you have an expired license.
So you see, when a license expired, you do not have a license.
Oh.
Are we together? Okay. So we are talking about a broadcaster without a license. Everything else would be good. Maybe previously you were also compliant, but we have found you without a license, period.
Okay.
The 30 million is for somebody who is totally illegal and is having equipment that was not even allowed to be on the network in the first place.
Okay.
But we gave you permission to be on the network. You have been on the network, but the license did expire. So we find you without a license. So that is the penalty, 500,000 and imprisonment of up to 1 year. And basically, for those two, that is the big issues, I think, in there. Maybe for people who are also dealing with the Bizindalo. Again, when we confiscate that equipment, it is not returned to you. Even when you regularize, that equipment is not returned to you, it will be destroyed. So that is something also people have to contend with. Of course, we have seen that people who deal in Bizindalo, the business costs in setup are quite low. People spend just, a few million shillings, 2-3 million shillings, and you're able to set up a Bizindalo. So many of them, even when we take them down, those very hard knock criminals, they will go around and still put up another one because it is affordable.
Wow.
So that's why you see sometimes this is a vicious circle. We have to continue engaging, we have to continue creating awareness, then we have to continue monitoring, and we expect that the public can also play their part by always notifying us where these things are cropping up, because sometimes we can't be everywhere given our resources. We would want surgical interventions, like the 20 that have already been complained to us. We know where they are, we know who complained against them. Even when these people are taken to courts of law, we will have people who basically give testimony in that regard. Maybe I need to say that there in the past, we have had these guys who have been brought to book, and sometimes the cases have been lost in a court of law simply because nobody wants to give testimony that this guy was actually illegally broadcasting in their jurisdiction and not giving them a peace of mind.
Wow. So what challenges do you have you encountered during your operations? Are there no forces like you could reach someone and it is some operation by a big person, maybe in government also? What kind of challenges have you encountered?
I think you have said it. Given what we are as a country, it is unfortunate that some of the people propagating legality are also sometimes people in authority.
Wow.
So you find, for example, an illegal broadcasting equipment, a Bizindalo, and it is being owned by a councillor. And this is a councillor who is popular, has a following, and sometimes you have found people wanting to be riotous simply because the councillor's equipment has been put down. So those are usually there. So we have had sometimes a few instances where we have some running battles, especially with youth who have been mobilized to challenge us in this regard. And this is where usually we appeal to the public to understand that we operate in an environment where there are some guidelines, there are rules. Otherwise, you cannot govern a country, a community with no rules at all. So we are comfortable, we have the peace of mind simply because a majority of us are able to abide by the rules. So that is something people need to appreciate. And we do not do this simply because we want to hurt somebody, we want to disadvantage somebody. That is why our first point of call is to create awareness, like on platforms like this. But two, we will engage. Like tomorrow, we are having an engagement of stakeholders in the broadcasting space just to discuss issues of inappropriate content on broadcasting platforms. We engage, we hear alternative views, and we can come up with consensus on how to move forward. This is our country, and the moral fabric is dear to everybody. I think that is somebody, all of us have a responsibility for that. So even in this game, we do not first come just to confiscate, to basically prosecute. We will engage people, we will notify them, we will summon them, and when everything else has failed, then we will go for prosecution.
Oh, wow. Now let's talk about, you did mention about the public. What role can the public play in helping the operations of UCC?
It's important that, one, we have continuous engagement with the public. The beauty that with technology today, we have provided for example, a toll-free number where the public can reach out to us and tell us any impropriety that is happening within their jurisdiction. That toll-free number is an easy number. It is free. It is toll-free because it does not cost you any airtime or data to call on that number. It is 0800 222 777. 0800 222 777. We have agents who are usually online, ready to listen to you, ready to talk to you, ready to advise you from Monday to Friday from 8 to 5 p.m. So you call us and tell us what is happening in your area, because that also informs our interventions. As any agents of government now that is driving the wave of digitization, we are also on social media platforms. And we are seeing many people also engaging in social media. So you can actually be able to call us out on our social media platforms, and we will be able to respond. We will pick up that call. We will be able to get your contacts, get back to you, and find out what the issue is. We are here to make sure that all Ugandans can actually enjoy communications in this country.
By the way, before we wind up, is there regulation to the online media platforms? Like someone has an online TV, things like that.
Excellent.
Is there regulation?
Fantastic. That's a very brilliant question. Now, we need to understand that currently, world over, because of the innovations that are coming up in digitizing many of these platforms, there are a lot of previously brick and mortar services that have now gone online. That's why we have e-commerce and these kind of things. So today we also have online radios, and these are licensed. We have people who will have online channels, either using applications or using the likes of YouTube and so on, and these are also licensed. So our regulations and laws in the country take care for that. But there is also a gray area, and this is what we call peer-to-peer communications. I have a blog, and I only put, it's a personal blog, and I only put content out of my interest, my creativity, my innovation, and this blog is accessible by maybe a few friends and colleagues and family members. Now the question is, do you regulate that? We do not regulate that. You get me? But what people need to be careful about is that we have laws like the Computer Misuse Act. If you peddle inappropriate content, if I may call it like that, content that is immoral, content that is obscene, content that is distressful to others, and they are able to come across it, and they are able to report that, you will find yourself cornered on misusing a computer. That is what they call the Computer Misuse Act. So we have regulation for people who are in the business of using these platforms to broadcast. Because if you fall under the ambit of broadcast as defined under the Uganda Communications Act, meaning simultaneous dissemination of information to a wide public, you are broadcasting, you have to be licensed. That's why we have people who have blogs. If you have a blog that reaches 30,000 people, that is something to think about, isn't it? We are inviting those people to get a license, and the license for those people is just 100,000 shillings. Because we want you to know the risks of your content reaching very many people. You can be able to mislead, you can be able to misinform, you have the potential to disinform, you have the risk of carrying fake news, which can create havoc in society. So we want you to know certain guidelines you need to be able to work with. Otherwise, that is a thin line. And all over the world, many countries are also working out to see how best to regulate that space. Our current regulations will look at people who are broadcasters. People who are peer-to-peer are not regulated by ourselves. If I send a WhatsApp to somebody, it may have inappropriate content, but if that content makes its way in the public domain, and somebody actually complains about it, now we get interested. Because there are laws like the Computer Misuse Act that will find you culpable. So people need to know the regulatory framework and how it works.
Exactly.
So usually maybe you get guidance on that so that you don't find yourself on this wrong side of the table.
And briefly, also about the illicit content being posted everywhere, every time, and it is becoming a growing habit in Uganda. What regulations do we look at? How are you, as UCC, the person in charge of regulating such, trying to come on board, because it is becoming too much?
So for starters, we are appealing to licensed broadcasters because these are people who know better, who already have an existing regulatory framework in the minimum broadcasting standards to desist. We always advise people, our regulations are not designed to stifle creativity or innovation. You can produce your content, be creative, be innovative, but your content needs to be scheduled appropriately. If content is not appropriate for young children, 10 years, 13 years, 16 years, do not schedule it in the watershed period. Do not schedule it at a time when our younglings are watching. Schedule it where only the adults will be watching, because that content is also produced for certain audiences, people who can find it acceptable and not distressful. So schedule it appropriately. Provide it on demand services so that people actually ask for that, because today with the technology we have, it is possible. The growth of on-demand content has gone up. So that is one way we are appealing that broadcasters need to follow the minimum broadcasting standards, but now we are also emphasizing the issue of classification of content. That's why we're saying that any piece of content, let it be an advertising, let it be a song, let it be a video, it needs to be taken to the Media Council for it to be given a classification. If it's given a classification, it even guides parents, guardians, saying that no, that content was labeled 18 and above. So my son, who is 10 years old, cannot have access to that content. People who are managing platforms will be able to navigate the restrictions to make sure, because you know that today, like on certain platforms, there are parental controls. So you can put a parental control saying that on this platform, because it's accessible by my children, any content that is classified 16 and above, 18 and above, should not be seen by my kid. Because we know now kids are not only watching these things during watershed period. During the day, people have access now to the internet, even kids on tablets. So the classification should be able to help us to guide minders, to guide parents on how to navigate the tricky landscape of content. So minimum broadcasting standards is one thing, two, classification of content, so that content is appropriately scheduled. But above all, we think that any Ugandan, if you really love our country, this is our country, we have a moral fabric to protect. We have a moral fabric to uphold. We have a culture. I do not think that we need to be careless by just putting out any content, inappropriate content, without being mindful, especially of our young generation and what we're likely to be doing to them. So I am appealing to a sense of responsibility here, that as broadcasters, even if there's a regulatory framework in place, we all have a responsibility to our country, to our people, and especially to our next generation.
Wow. Thank you so much. We are Church of Uganda Family TV, and that information was very, very important to chip in today's conversation. Well, as we wind up, please, your last remarks in just a few seconds.
I think what I need to say, which is something from us at the Uganda Communications Commission, is that we are deeply committed in fostering a media landscape that respects our shared values as a country, to protect our children and to protect decency. We understand the powerful role of media in the way it shapes minds, it shapes the heart, and this is why we are taking decisive measures to curb broadcasts that are inappropriate and offensive. So we believe that together, with the spirit of responsibility, we can actually uphold the values of molarity in our country.
Wow.
Thank you.
Mr. Ibrahim Bbosa, the head of public and international relations at the Uganda Communications Commission. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
It's been a pleasure.
And giving us this wonderful information. I'm very hopeful that that information was very useful to you out there. Well, we cannot go past this. My name is Luke Majumba Ali Naitwe, and we've been powered by Protea Hotel by Marriott in